just 115, and I don't know where the Sun River is, but no. Well, we'll just stay on time. So. Okay. All right.
Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. Could I get everybody to stand and face the flag and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you guys very much, and good afternoon, Ellsworth Middle School. I'd like to welcome all of you guys to what I certainly hope is the beginning of an annual Veterans Day celebration here at the school to salute all of the veterans that served in our country. So as you guys may have guessed by the uniform that I'm wearing today, yes, I am a veteran of the United States Air Force. I joined in 1990 during the original Gulf War and served until 2011 in an active duty capacity until the most recent war on terrorism. Totally 21 years of active duty service. And I must tell you that being a member of the armed forces was something that probably was one of the greatest privileges of my life and one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had. And certainly now, another very distinct privilege that I can say is to be your assistant principal. So thank you guys for joining us here today. One of the goals that's shared by our principal, Mr. Wood, and our entire faculty and staff is that you will leave this gathering having a better understanding of the importance of Veterans Day, not only for those veterans who served our country, but for the families of those who gave so freely of their time, their talents, and for some, gave the ultimate sacrifice of their lives. If any of your classes, as I've said before, and a few of them as I've stopped by, ever want me to come in and talk to you about any of my experiences or my time in the Middle East, I would be more than happy to do that. I would just ask your teachers reach out, and I will very, very happily come in and talk to you guys. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. This is Becky Anderson.
Veterans Day gets its origins from Armistice Day on November 11, 1919, the anniversary of the end of World War I. 7 years later, Congress passed a resolution for an annual observed day. In 1938, it became a national holiday. And this poem was written by an anonymous author called Sacrifice. When Americans see movies about the horrors of war, they sympathize with veterans. That's definitely for sure. And it's great when citizens say they really care. However, they have no idea of the pain because they were not there. Combat is very gruesome and sometimes very cruel. When fighting the enemy, there is no golden rule. Heartache and suffering often define each day. The troops give their all, and with the big price they pay. Who are these individuals who fought battles sometimes won? They are some father's daughter. They are some mother's son. Conflict is fought in many distant lands like Korea and Iraq, to name a few. We salute the dwindling numbers of veterans who fought in World War II. Yes, many are called to our nation they serve, and everyone agrees America's gratitude they deserve. So ask any vet, and they'll most certainly agree, America's numerous freedoms are really never free. Mr. Borst?
Okay, so I'm going to be singing My Country to the Thee, and I'm going to be singing this for my relatives who have served, and everyone who's served, but for me personally, this is really for my family. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside let freedom ring.
Veterans. Veterans are men and women who defended the USA. They served their country in a very special way. Many were Marines. They were the first to answer the call. Sometimes they'd like to forget everything they saw. The Army troops marched many miles to come to those in need. Often they gave up their food for citizens of foreign lands they did not often feed. Then there was the Air Force, who bravely took to the sky. Their extensive training taught them how to fly. Who could forget the Navy, true sailors on the sea? They often chased their enemy as they tried to flee. The Coast Guard is the smallest branch on the military tree. They rescued those in peril on the very stormy sea. So exactly who are these brave souls that gave so freely of their years? They are the men and women who left loved ones in tears. They are moms and dads, aunts and uncles too, and grandparents that might be related to you. Veterans are special people that Americans need to treat with respect and gratitude, for they seldom yell retreat. Now some vets are still young, while others do grow old. Listen closely to their stories, for they are rarely told. Many students here may someday answer the call, and they too will give America their all.
Some of us, most of us, were very young when we entered the military. Most of us were nervous, most of us were scared, some of us were filled with self-doubt. Most of us missed our freedom. We marched, we jumped, we swam, we marched, we shot, we saluted, we marched. Finally, we received our orders. Some of us swabbed the deck. Some of us chipped paint. Some of us plotted navigation. Some of us lost our way. Some of us prepared food for others. Some of us went hungry. Some of us typed a report. Some of us filed a report. Some of us used the latrine. Some of us cleaned the latrine. Some of us sent a message. Some of us received a message. Some of us wired an engine. Some of us repaired an engine. Some of us created a weather report. Some of us weathered a storm. Some of us flew a helicopter. Some of us jumped from a helicopter. Some of us sweltered in the heat. Some of us froze in the cold. Some of us digged a ditch. Some of us slept in a ditch. Some of us carried ammo. Some of us loaded ammo. Some of us fired a bullet. Some of us received a bullet. Some of us bled. Some of us stopped the bleeding. Some of us dressed a wound. Some of us succumbed to a wound. Some of us fired up our buddies. Some of us put out a fire. Some of us cried out loud. Some of us suffered in silence. Some of us prayed for ourselves, and some of us prayed for others. Some of us gained a friend. Some of us lost a friend. Some of us carried a casket. Some of us folded a flag. Some of us suffered from nightmares. Some of us dream from home. So why did we do it? Why did we serve? Surely not for the salary with a 30 days leave. Obligation it was that prompted us to join. For country, for family, and for the safety of all. Mostly we returned, many others did fall. We ask for your respect, for the care we have earned. We do it all again, we are your vets. Boys and girls, war is a terrible, terrible thing. It affects many, many people. The obvious, the soldiers that have to fight, their families that worry and expect the worst, and the innocent civilians who are in the middle of the battle because the battles are being fought in their homeland. They watch their towns, their villages, their neighborhoods, their homes being destroyed. Now, all wars are the same, and yet all wars are different. I'm not totally familiar with the curriculum people learn in school. I do know that Mrs. Brown just finished talking about the French and Indian War, and now they're starting on the Revolutionary War. I think everybody has heard of the Civil War. Over 600,000 people lost their lives, all on America's soil. In the early part of the 20th century, there was World War I. The war to end all wars, the Great War. There was nothing great about it. Chemical warfare came in, and medically we were not prepared for that. About 20 years later, America entered World War II. World War II, we entered as a result of the bombing of our naval base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The entire country was supportive. Millions of young men and women joined the cause. That was a brutal war. Today, soldiers go for a 12-month tour. World War II, dubbed the greatest generation, they went for the duration. They were gone for years. If they survived the beaches of Normandy, they moved them on to the Battle of the Bulge or wherever. However, when those soldiers came home, they came home to a hero's welcome. Many of them took advantage of the GI Bill and went back to school. Tons of people got married. They had children of their own. And they're known as the baby boomers. They were born right after the war, right when the war ended. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Less than 10 years, we were back at war, the Korean War. It's dubbed the Quiet War. There's nothing quiet about it if you were fighting. About, well, a little more than a decade, we had Vietnam, a very unpopular war. The American people fought it. Every night there were riots shown on the TV. If you were a male, a boy in this country, you were 18 to 26 years of age, you weren't in school, and you were in reasonably good health, you were drafted. At the height of the war, 32,000 soldiers or young men were drafted per month, nationwide. That war came just in time for the baby boomers. They were getting out of high school and some getting out of college to serve. They didn't come home to a hero's welcome. There's a lot of resistance. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Gulf War because that's your generation's war, and I think we all are still trying to figure that out. I would ask if you have a relative or a family member that served in the military, just raise your hand. If you're in the classrooms, raise your hand. Okay. All right. So many children have come up to me, or students, I'm sorry, have come up to me and told and spoke of their relatives, many staff members. I sort of made a list. Mrs. Johnston, who couldn't be here with us, the sixth grade teacher, her 90-year-old grandfather fought in World War II. Mr. B, thank you for your service. Mr. Tracy in the sunroom, he followed his father who served in the Air Force, and he served in the Air Force. Mrs. Perna, where is she? Oh, I thought she was here. Anyway, Mrs. Perna does the hand signals. She was in the Coast Guard. She was a Coast Guard officer. Mr. Carl, our custodian. He was an electrician's mate in the Navy, and it's very funny when you hear him tell the stories. Miss Pelletier, her father was an Air Force pilot who flew missions in Vietnam and Korea. Both Mrs. Pelletier's sons served in the Army. Mrs. Norwood, in the 8th grade, her son was a Marine. I'll tell you, those Marines are tough. I had to bandage up a lot of them. They were a tough bunch. Mr. McCormick, also in the 8th grade. His father did 2 tours in Vietnam in the Army. Mrs. Anderson, her husband was in the Marines and now is in the National Guard. Mrs. Higgins, 6th grade. Her late father was in the Merchant Marines. The Merchant Marines, you know, they were the ones that had to take all the equipment to Europe and across on these ships. It was very dangerous. A lot of Merchant Marines lost their lives. That was Miss Higgins' father. My buddy, Mr. Newitt, his late father fought in the Korean War. Mrs. M.W., who couldn't be with us today, her late father was highly decorated and fought in World War II. Mrs. Bukowski, her father retired from the Army, her brother retired from the Navy, and her husband is about to retire from the Army. Wow. Mrs. Jordan, 5th grade. Her grandfather, her father, and her son all served in the Army. Mrs. Brown, our music teacher. Her 88-year-old father was a paratrooper in Korea, and that was rough training. Mrs. Bland, our librarian. Her father retired from the Army and served tours in Vietnam. Mrs. Morse, her grandfather was in the Navy. Mrs. Hanson, she's an ed tech, works mostly in the in the elementary school. Her husband's on active duty in the Coast Guard. Mrs. Hardy, her father was in the Navy, her brother was in the Air Force, and her other brother's in the National Guard. Now, you've also heard that veterans a lot of them don't like to tell their stories, but I would encourage you, if you have a veteran in your family, to ask. Now, the 7th grade, we were going to take a field trip to the Coal Museum. We were going to talk to some veterans, but for some reason it did get postponed. I hope it's just postponed. Before 9/11, we had a thing called Desert Storm. Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and the first George Bush was president. My younger son was a freshman at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, and he came home one weekend and said, "Hey, I enlisted." I'm like, "What?" He quit college, and he was a radioman over there. When he came home, he said, I'd asked him questions. It was fine. He didn't want to talk about it. So his mother, my wife, said, "Matthew, why don't you want to talk about it?" He said, "Well, Dad never talked about military." So everybody has a story. And I'm going to tell you a story now that happened to me over 50 years ago. It's over half a century. This is the second time I've told this story. The first time I told it was last June. I was talking to my granddaughter, FaceTiming in South Carolina, and she was talking about colleges. She was naming different colleges, and I was going along with it. And she said, I think I may look at Emory College in Atlanta. And I said, yuck. And she said, why? And I told her this story. When I came back from overseas, I was a wreck. Believe it or not, I was skinny. I had lost a lot of weight. I was gaunt. My face was sunken in. The first thing they did was cut your hair so you had a high and tight haircut. I couldn't understand it. I wasn't back very long. And I had to go to Jacksonville, Florida, to the Disease Vector Control School to find out about bugs and diseases. So I went. And on the way back to my base, I was flying in New Jersey. I had to stop in Atlanta, Georgia. And I went into the Atlanta airport. It was the old Atlanta airport. In those days, when you traveled for military, you wore a dress uniform. It was in the summer, and I was all in white, head to toe, even my shoes. I probably looked like a ghost. So I went into the restaurant, and I sat at the lunch counter on a stool, and I picked up the menu. And I saw their Reuben sandwich. I had never had a Reuben sandwich. I grew up in a very poor working class neighborhood in Baltimore. So I asked the waitress, and she told me about it. And I noticed there was 3 college guys sitting on stools. They were sort of giggling, laughing at my expense. And I was too tired to fool with them. So I, in the middle of my lunch, the one guy reached over and says, hey buddy, did you shoot anybody? And I turned to him and I showed him my insignia, which was an eagle with a caduceus, which is the universal symbol for medical. And I said, I didn't shoot anybody. I'm a hospital corpsman, a medic. And I looked down and he had a t-shirt on and it said Emory University. And I thought, boy, I hope I never have to go there. So the waitress was taking all this in. She brought over a big piece of pecan pie and sat it in front of me, which I had not ordered. And she went over and she tore up the check in front of those guys and she said, this guy doesn't have to pay for his food. He's paid enough. And that was a random act of kindness. I'll never forget. So you be kind to people. A couple years ago, we had a quick assembly, and I'm going to give you the same advice that I said then. 3 things. Honor and obey your parents and your grandparents. Number 2, respect your teachers. When I say teachers, I'm talking about substitute teachers. I'm talking about ed techs that give adult support. I'm talking about the custodial staff that cleans your bathrooms, the kitchen staff that cooks your food, the bus drivers that transport you back and forth safely, and the office up there. It seems like they get about 1,000 phone calls a day from your parents. So give them the respect that they deserve. And finally, love your country. America is the greatest nation on this planet. America is the greatest nation in the history of humankind. And you've been a great audience, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. Where do you want to do the dismissal? It's sorry to put you in.
All right, guys, thank you for being here, and I know it's emotional. Thank you all for your service, and please listen to what Mr. White said. If you have family members that are in the service, please have a conversation with them. Find out what it was like. I will dismiss everybody that's on the floor.